Good afternoon. Welcome to the Dorset Historical Society's third Thursday lunchtime lecture for October 2023. I have a great treat with Warren Broderick, who will be talking about Fenton stoneware pottery and things he's been literally digging up recently from archives and from the ground. When I first started here in 2011, I didn't know anything about the Fentons, but I knew that quickly that they were a big deal for historians. And in 2012, we had a stoneware pottery festival out on the front yard where contemporary potters from the area were having their stuff. And inside here, we had a symposium where people came from all around to talk about their research into the Fenton family.
Is that
of
when
potters.
Pete Schreiber was
Yes.
here presenting? Okay.
Yeah, and they were presenting about the kiln in Boston and then in Connecticut and here. And well, meanwhile, 11 years later, Warren's got even more interesting stuff. So maybe we should have another symposium at some point. But I've known Warren for about that long. He's done a lot of research into local artists. Before this, most significantly, putting together a database of all the artists who have exhibited at Southern Vermont Artists, which is just an amazing thing.
21,000 records in it. That database, by the way.
I understand there are 21,000 hand-entered records.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a lot of artists. That's a lot of pages.
Yeah.
Yes. But now, in the recent years, he's been going all around New England, tracking down the Fenton family, which not only were there a lot of Fentons, so the family tree gets confusing, but they moved all around too. So always a moving target, but I'm sure Warren will make it all clear. So please, welcome Warren Broderick.
Thank you. John, do you know Lorraine German from Granby, Connecticut, Mad River Antiques?
I think you've introduced her.
She's the other person who's been working on this, specifically the new pottery. I'm not going to be talking specifically much about the Fenton pottery in Dorset, but in context of what of their other potteries and stuff. I'm going to try to give a brief explanation of this family. They all came from Mansfield, Connecticut, down where Yukon is, and there were three potters who were brothers. Jonathan Sr., who we think ended up in East Dorset. He has no gravestone there, but his wife is there. We think he may be there. But he had two other brothers. He had a Jacob Fenton, and Jacob was in. He started out in New Haven, and it was his pottery that some of the ones that came to Vermont and Hampshire trained at. Well, Jacob was in New Haven. He ended up going to Otsego County, New York, and ending up to a place out in Chautauqua County, where he and his son had a pottery. Yet another brother, Solomon, and he worked in New Milford, Connecticut. And after a few years there, he went west as well. He ended up in Shenango County, New York. So you're finding a move now. The Jonathan Sr. From Mansfield, Connecticut. Sometimes he gets mixed up with Jonathan Jr., who ran the potteries in Dorset. And so sometimes we can't tell them apart. But we know Jonathan Sr. was in Walpole in the 1790s. And somewhere along the line, in his elder years, he ended up in East Dorset. And his wife has a gravestone, along with a grandson of his in East Dorset. And we think he may be there as well, but didn't have enough money. We know somewhere like around 1830 or so, John. So we're going to run into them. But where this gets interesting is Jonathan Sr. had three sons. And I mentioned the first one, who we don't think was a potter. His name was Gamaliel Fenton. He went to Walpole, New Hampshire, where, he cast bells and made town clocks. I mean, how specific an employment is that? How many town clocks he made, I don't know. But he married a a young woman named Weber, whose father was a Christopher Weber, if that name sounds kind of familiar. And Christopher Weber was a cordwainer in Walpole and a Revolutionary War hero at Saratoga, and he was in Walpole in the 1760s, so he and Gamaliel explain why. These two other brothers spent some time in Walpole. You have Jonathan Jr., born 1766, who, I say, he was the one who made the pottery in Dorset. And just to give you an idea of his whereabouts, I could never remember all these. He married first wife Rosalinda. No, actually, that would be his wife in Connecticut in 1790. He worked for a while for his uncles in both New Haven and New Milford, Connecticut. Around 1787, he came up to Walpole. And by the way, his second wife was a Weber. She was another daughter of Christopher Weber. So after a couple years there, he went back to New Haven, 1789, 1790. And from there, and in New Milford, he was there till 1793. And he's the one who went to Boston, that Lorraine German has written about. And he was in Boston from 1793 to 1796. Then he came back to Walpole, and he was there till 1798, when he moved from Walpole to what's now Bloomfield, Connecticut, and established a pottery that Lorraine has found that nobody ever knew anything about before. And he was there till 1801, when he came to Dorset and established the pottery in Dorset Hollow. And then is it about 1809 or 1810, we believe he moved to East Dorset? 1810, established the pottery there. However, by 1835, he was in Wethersfield, New York, which is I think Wyoming County in New York. And the last years of his life, 1845 to 1850, when he was in Alexander, which I think is in Genesee or Wyoming County, where he was living with his daughter and son-in-law and died there. So he was all over the place. The one that I'm going to be talking about, Richard Weber Fenton, is a little easier to follow. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Walpole, because really nobody officially ever, none of the books like Watkins and Early New England Potters or anything, said anything about a pottery in Walpole. They sort of figured, well, if these two Fentons were potters like in Boston and Connecticut, and they lived in Walpole a few years before they went to Vermont, maybe they were potting, or what else were they doing over there? Well, they were potting all right, and let's see, we will get down to what was going on. The Walpole is there. This is Dorset, this is St. Johnsbury. And Walpole was a pretty busy place like at this time in the 1790s. So, and there are there's various public records showing they were in Walpole in the 1790s. And their pottery was located on the land of, well, Jonathan's father-in-law, Christopher Weber. And he originally got a 100-acre piece in 1767 up on a hill east of the village of Walpole on Ramsey Road. And the local history there talks about being a pottery, so I thought I'd see if I could, local history is not always being true, see if I could actually find something. And I did find the pottery site, and it's in that lawn there. He had his house, Christopher Weber's house was there, and he drew clay from a couple goose ponds, and that's one of the ponds with a clay bottom, up on Ramsey Road in Walpole. And I don't know how readable this is. Christopher Weber died in 1800, and he deeded most of his land to a son-in-law, Dr. Stephen Johnson, and not to the Fentons. So this is one reason why they're moving around a lot around 1800. But this deed to Dr. Samuel Johnson, his son-in-law, talks about accepting, I'm looking for the wording here, accepting the buildings belonging to the potter's business and so on, which I guess was attached to the back of that house. So there's your proof, there other proof there was a pottery there. The Walpole Historical Society, not the Bennington jug, but the pieces of redware were all came out of Walpole and are believed to have made there, mostly utilitarian stuff, in the 1790s by the Fentons. And this is an interesting article from a New Hampshire newspaper in 1793, and it talks about this derecho coming through Walpole and the wind doing all this damage. And it said that it knocked the glass out of the panes out of the windows of the house of Mr. Weber, and the house shook but survived. And it said the only, find it in here, Colonel Weber, the only person injured in it is mentioned. Oh, it said the only person injured was a Mr. Jonathan Fenton, who had a broken clavicle or something like this from the damage when the wind came through in 1793. Well, which Jonathan Fenton? I'm inclined to think probably the father, because because at that time, you know, the son was either in Connecticut or in Boston potting. So unless you were up on a visit, it was probably his father living in Walpole. Whether Jonathan Sr. was a potter or not, I can't imagine he didn't have some role in the pottery industry. So that you have all this activity in Walpole, you know, up to around 1800, when Christopher Weber, and of course that's who Christopher Weber Fenton is named after, when he died up there. And that seems to end the activity in Walpole. And John, I think, can we do the switch?
Oh yeah.
I don't dare. I'm used to using a mouse on a desktop, and with a slightly different version of Windows.
This is where I either come up here and impress everyone with my technical know-how,
Yeah.
or we're here for 5 minutes trying to figure things out.
Which will it be?
Ooh,
Oh, that the last time.
is that what you're looking for?
Yeah. Okay, now we're in
There we go.
the. Well, actually, this is interesting. This is a daguerreotype. I think it's an 8-plate daguerreotype from the 1840s, and it's in remarkable condition. This is all by the Bennington Museum. But the person we're interested in here is Richard Weber Fenton. Now he's up there. He's a younger brother of John, who came to Dorset. So he's up there, you know, potting in Walpole until he's sort of forced out. He's married a woman from Walpole, and he's forced out. Well, I think in 1799 he knew the writing on the wall that he wasn't going to get his father-in-law's land in Walpole. So he started making couple purchases in St. Johnsbury. And he married a Leffie, I think her name might have been Relief, Harrington in Walpole in 1801. And by then he settled in St. Johnsbury. He was very active in local affairs. He constructed a sawmill, and I'll show you a map where the site is. It'll be coming up next. He was appointed Brigadier General in the state militia. He resigned that appointment a few years later. We'll get into why. And he had 2 daughters and a son, Leander, who took over the pottery after him. And he constructed a house. How well does anyone here familiar with St. Johnsbury? A bit. It's between St. Johnsbury and St. Johnsbury Center, right near where the railroad comes up along just north of Hospital Drive there. And yeah, I've been on the site and everything. And he constructed a pottery there somewhere in that time period. It said he was a large, strong, muscular man, very fond of fox hunting, and the only fiddler in the place. But anyway, I think we'll see if we can again, sans pointer. I mean, this is the St. Johnsbury we know, and St. and Henry, and he's in here in this area in between the two. And you would never know unless you knew where to look for the pottery site. You'd never know now. There's a remnant of an old stone dam where a small stream had been dammed up for water power to run it, and the pottery site had an ice house on it later. And I did a little digging there last fall and found some sherds and things. If you didn't know where to look, you'd never find it. By the way, St. Johnsbury is an interesting little place of only, I think, 7,000 people or so. That has two of the more interesting museums in the United States. The Fairbanks Museum, which I think was built by Richardson, and the St. Johnsbury Athenaeum, which has one of the best collections of like Hudson River School art in America. And it includes the giant painting of by Bierstadt. One wall in their gallery, I know this has nothing to do with the pottery, has this like 8-foot by 11-foot painting done by Bierstadt called the Valley of Yosemite. And the way they have the lighting, there's a place you kind of stand in front of it and you feel like you're in the valley. It's really incredible, for a place of 7,000 people, which shows what the Fairbankses did with their money. Well, they also founded the St. Johnsbury Academy and a few other things like that. But that's where the Fentons were. And yes, just a little bit about St. Johnsbury. It was most famous for the Fairbanks Scale Works and the other industries through there and everything I was talking about. And it is sort of, when you start getting, north and particularly north and east of St. Johnsbury, you really feel, you're like in Siberia or something. It's really interesting country, let's say. The only map that shows the pottery, it says L. Fenton Stoneware Factory. This is the Southern Leander, and it's over. There is the pottery in the house, and there's the little stream coming down into the Passumpsic River. And there's actually, is this pre-railroad? No, here's the railroad coming up through there, which still does, has freights a few times a day through there. So there is the site. Again, from the Bennington Museum, this is about an 1850 albumen print of Richard W. Fenton's house, which would have been built shortly around 1800 or after. But I don't know how well it shows. I need a longer arm. With no pointer, I must have a long arm. Hey, if you look back here, you see this? Those are kilns and chimneys, like that's the pottery back in there. And I think you see two kilns because he started out as a redware potter and later on they had a stoneware pottery. And I think what they did is they built a second kiln. But again, photos and daguerreotypes like in the 1840s and stuff are really, they're hard to find. I was explain a little later why they're all ended up mostly in the Bennington Museum. Richard Fenton, he may have been a fiddler and he had and all these strong and muscular. He had some various problems. This is just a case where the man around the sawmill with him too, where he passed some kind of a spurious banknote or something like this in 1822. But he did worse, if we're ready here. I found this in the Vermont State Archives, and if anybody wonders why one bothers looking through somewhat confusing book volumes and papers of early court records, other than there's the people who, I'll give a lecture about this. There's the people who think court records in research don't go beyond surrogates courts, probate things that are doing family history. The civil and criminal records at the New York State Archives, we've got enough court records to, it could fill the whole Vermont State Archives building just for New York. These with all kinds of fabulous things in it. Well, they have them for Vermont, and this was in Supreme Court in Caledonia County. And I assume you can read, can everyone read the print? No? Well, yeah, essentially he raped the wife of one of his neighbors. And this is from the grand jury, this is the grand jury report. And even for the time, it doesn't spare much. And she was beat, bruised, and wounded, so their life was greatly despaired of and everything. And her name was Huldah, wife of Samuel French, and they're buried in the same cemetery up in St. Johnsbury Center as the Fentons. But what happened here is initially they had the grand jury report, and he pled innocent, whatever. Then they had a trial jury and found him guilty in about a day. But what's interesting is what his punishment was. He would have spent, I don't know, at least 10 years or 20 years or something in the state prison, which I think would have been in Windsor then, the early state prison, or pay his victims $300 and pay the court costs. And that's what he did. So the pottery business, well, he had to be reasonably successful. I mean, in 1817, $300 is a lot of money. So he why does this remind me of what happens to some of our public figures today? He paid, imagine living within a couple miles of these people. I mean, they lived in the 1850s, he lived 1851, all that. And that's how they resolved it, and he kept working. So the pottery business, we think, must have been successful. I can't imagine what this was like in a little place like St. Johnsbury. And oh, by the way, it's not shortly after the conviction, he resigned his commission as adjutant general. I mean, I'm sure he got a visit from someone in the governor's office or something in Vermont to do that. And he had to also do sort of like community service for the state of Vermont. Like there was one time where he had a wagon. He had to truck some trunk with documents and other things in it up to Montpelier for something. And he was just like ordered to do it by the governor and did it. And all I can think is that, he had to be on call to do this kind of stuff as part of the sentence or something. But anyway, so I don't know how well I hope Jonathan, Fenton, and Dorset behaved a little better than this. But anyway, but just this who we're talking about. Yeah, tough looking guy, I'll tell you. This would have been again in the latter years of his life. We'll go on. Oh, back. So what did they make there? Well, there's a few pieces of redware survive. These are miniatures owned by the Bennington Museum, and they were made for the marriage of his son Leander to Lucy Lord. Before that, they made for it in 1829. And the little jug and the pitcher, and the clay is also reddish as well. This other thing is a round disc, and the family preserved it, and exactly what it was. They said it was from that pottery. What it was, we don't really know. I mean, I don't think it was just merely the cover of a pot or something. They wouldn't just preserve that. It wasn't ornamental. So I don't know really what purpose it served. And I'll get in a little while why that stuff survived. Now, even better, we've got a pitcher and a vase that are in the St. Johnsbury has another museum too. They have the History and Heritage Center, which is they've taken over an old house kind of like this and turned it into a museum, which is really great. And that and they have the history collections that used to be in the Fairbanks Museum, which is a natural history museum and planetarium. Well, they've got these two pieces, you see the same orange, just kind of these two pieces of redware. I mean, this you'd swear was made in Maine. This thing is beautiful. And then you've got this vase where you've got Albany slip over the glaze some way, I've never seen this before. You've got, I don't know, lead and manganese or something in the glaze, but you've also got the handles and the top rim of glazed in Albany slip. They said they had these things in boxes for years. They had been transferred by the Fairbanks Museum, and I first saw them. I sent pictures. There's a man named Justin Thomas who's been doing a whole bunch of books on early New England redware and stuff. And I sent him these. I said, "Do you ever see anything like these, especially that he hadn't?" And these were probably made by Richard W. Fenton. They were in the family. And did you have any intact redware that came from Dorset Hollow that you know of?
Attributed, that piece right there.
The little jug?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so these four things we've seen here came from the first redware pottery in St. Johnsbury. By the way, St. Johnsbury and Dorset even now are a few miles apart. Like I think about 2.5, 3 hours apart by today's roads. I mean, they made sure, I mean, it's actually Richard was in St. Johnsbury before Jonathan was in Dorset. So they made sure they were in places where they maybe could communicate but didn't compete with each other. They're well enough apart. And then this is the son, Leander Fenton, who maybe just made the stoneware, we don't really know, because we don't know when he took over the pottery, but about a 12-year period. And he started making stoneware there. And this is another, you know, 8th plate daguerreotype of it from the Bennington Museum. And another person who, I see you have a piece here that's marked Fenton. You have, I guess, the Fred mark, Fenton and Hancock. Well, Hancock, if you follow the Bennington pottery, is Frederick Hancock. He had worked at these various places in his life, and eventually he was in St. Johnsbury with Leander Fenton between 52 and 56, and then he moved to Worcester and founded the first stoneware pottery in Worcester, along with some guy named Norton, and you can imagine where Norton would have come from to found a pottery. He came from Bennington, and this is Frederick Hancock. This is the period when the more highly decorated pieces of St. Johnsbury blue decorated stoneware were made. Probably Frederick Hancock had a lot to do. Later on, if you want to look through this book in amazement, you'll see there's a 2-page spread devoted to a piece cooler that was made by Fenton and Hancock. And the other person who was associated there was a man named Franklin White, who ended up all over the place in the end. And he was there again in these period, and he was known for I'm trying to think where we see one. They were ovoid coolers, and besides the blue decoration and sizing, they had sprig applied. What that would be is like they molded something like an eagle or a flag or something. They molded it, and once it were molded, it was applied to the body and then covered usually with cobalt before the firing. And I think we will see a molded piece coming up. And these are some other potters we found there. Now James Gregg ended up in Bennington. Oh, Edward Crafts was from Whately and Amherst, Whately and Asheville, Massachusetts. Van Loon was in Asheville for a while, and some of the people were just local people. And a lot of them, from what we can tell, were just laborers working at this pottery. And again, this is all in the 1850s, because a ledger, Leander Fenton's ledger, for 1852 to 1860 survives, and it details every expenditure he did at the time, and some other things as well. And that's where we get the names. I mean, some of these people we'd never know who the heck they were. They worked there. You know, you got a period, there's no 1855 census in Vermont, and St. Johnsbury is too small to have city directories or anything. If they didn't own land, you wouldn't even know they were potters. And we will get to that ledger again. Let's The pottery, the next thing we know is that railroad that you saw on the map was put through in 1856, and this is where he grants an easement to the Connecticut-Passumpsic Railroad, and he talks about how he wants the crossing on this private road to the pottery kept flat or something, you know, level for the railroad. The other interesting thing, the pottery burned in 1859, and the history books have all said that, well, that was the end of the pottery. The loss was estimated at $1,200, so on. Well, what really happened is he reopened the pottery and he produced what he called brown glazed earthenware. Again, this is with the Bennington Museum. This is actually a piece of burned wood and nails from the pottery. I mean, the Fenton family were like hoarders with this stuff. But they had, and these again are the descendants of Richard W. and Leander. They kept this stuff. And they actually kept it in one big trunk and one big crate. We'll get to that in a minute. But so despite the fact all the books say, well, how do we know the pottery existed beyond 1860? Well, I looked at something. I didn't know it was, and the censuses that we normally research are, the ones on Ancestry and Family Search and all that kind, are the population schedules. Well, also they had products of agriculture and products of industry in these censuses, in the federal, and some of, well, Vermont doesn't have a state census, New York and Mass do, where they listed industries and, you know, major businesses in the town. So the Vermont State Library checked out, I knew he'd been the one in 1850, and they gave me the information on, you know, how many men were employed, how many pieces were made in a year, and what their value was, and this sort of stuff. And the person up there said, you know, there's an entry for them in 1860. I said, what, after the pottery burned? And I talked about, again, he employed 3 men, and they made brown earthenware. And the censuses were, the information was all collected in June. And probably in Vermont, that's when the snow finally melted in the Northeast Kingdom. But the census taker in the industrial schedule had a note said that this business began this March. So what must have happened is, after the fire in November, he probably ruminated over it, but didn't really do anything. Well, of course, also probably would have been under 6 feet of snow or something. But he started working in March, probably on the old redware kiln, which still survived, you know, if he couldn't make stoneware anymore, and was making a little bit of pottery, $4,300 worth. They did the census. But that didn't last very long, and they moved to a new house and in downtown St. Johnsbury, and they're in the St. Johnsbury Center. This is where some of the Fentons are buried with modest markers and all that. But, there's quite a bit of stoneware from St. Johnsbury, and a lot of it is going to be marked. We have found nothing marked for Richard. Richard may have only made redware, and redware was rarely marked anyway. But there's quite a bit of stoneware marked. A lot of it's marked Fenton and Hancock, which is 1852 to 1856. There are some pieces merely marked L. Fenton, St. Johnsbury, which have been either before or after the period with Hancock. And there's some pieces owned by either the Bennington Museum or the St. Johnsbury History and Heritage Center. And also, this is when we get into this is one of those ones I mentioned. They're wheel turned in pieces, put together with these. This has the sprig applied. Not only these sort of false handles, but this figure of the goddess Diana, and that was all done before the firing. And what's interesting is this is in the collection of the Vermont Historical Society. This is in the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford. This is marked Hastings and Belding, I think, Asheville, Mass. This thing that's not marked was one of these. Well, it really wasn't made in Gardner, Maine. It was either made in St. Johnsbury or Asheville, but it was another one. So these sort of coolers, and there's even a broadside price list. We'll see that as goes on. So these things were, we believe the person who made them was, actually made these was that Franklin White guy we saw. Oh, where's Franklin? Yeah, he's the one who made it. 'Cause, well, he was in Asheville, and then he moved to Salisbury to work there, and he's believed to be the one who created these pieces. You don't see early stoneware like ovoid jugs, and many of them mark St. Johnsbury, because I think by the time that Leander took over the potteries from his father and built the stonework kiln, which is maybe the 1840s, the ovoid pieces were getting out of fashion then. You were into straight-sided pieces of stoneware and everything. Some other interesting pieces were in the Fenton and Hancock. The one with the chickens eating there and all that, it was sold in, I think it was 2007 at Crocker Farm Auction. Oh, I think it sold for $36,000 or something like that. And I don't know where that one even ended up. This one this other one with the chickens, before and after, is owned by the Vermont Historical Society, and it was in the collection of an early collector named Harold Rugg. And what happened to it, we're not sure. I mean, they got it this way, and this has happened to it, and not because they haven't taken care of it. At some time in the past, I assume when Rugg was collecting in the 1920s and things like that, it probably was stored under some kind of conditions. Maybe where it was freezing and thawing or something. Something had been kept in or whatever. They have a couple pieces from his collection that have this kind of damage where the surface is all flaking away. And the only way you know exactly what it was is there was this older image of it. And so it had something to do, and they've ended up with a couple pieces. Fortunately, the cooler, the ovoid cooler, is in good condition. There was something with it. Or there was some, you would think some flaw in the manufacture that the surface would have started to peel off earlier. But it's unfortunate because these are pretty outstanding. And also I found a record in a newspaper out there of a large cooler with these molded applied chickens all around the bottom of it, where someone donated it to the Fairbanks Museum. However, when the Fairbanks Museum transferred the stuff to the St. Johnsbury History and Heritage Museum, which is only like 12, 15 years ago, it couldn't be found where someone had stolen it. Well, if it ever turns up in a major stoneware auction, I know what it looks like. But anyway, there's some more interesting pieces that have come up. See, this is another one. This is the other one they had, the Vermont Historians has with the damage. And you see it had the figure of a knight or a queen, or I think someone holding like a lance at it, medieval figure. This is one that was dug up there of a man smoking a pipe. And this is another one that was owned by a descendant of the Fentons that showed supposedly Queen Victoria on it or someone like that. And that figure there of the woman on the bottom, and keep that in mind when we look at this. This is the Asa Peabody Blood Cooler. I need to drink before I explain this whole. This is why did I get interested in St. Johnsbury? Well, this, which was purchased by Adam Weitzman at auction for $80,000, donated to the State Museum in New York, even though it has no New York connection really. It's a cooler. And the auctioneer had identified the man on the thing as General Asa Peabody Blunt, who was from St. Johnsbury. Well, I don't know, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but this is a photo of him in a Civil War uniform. This piece was made between 1852 and 1856. So the most he would have been some, it's a military coat, maybe an officer in the Vermont, and he's got a sword here, the Vermont militia, because there was no Civil War even by 1856. So I was asked to try to straighten out the thing, and I looked at how little was published in books about St. Johnsbury. I said, how far away is that from where I live? Oh, like 4 hours. I said, oh, what the hell, you know, well, I think I ought to research St. Johnsbury, and that was like 3 years ago, and resulted in this, and an article that hopefully will get published in Vermont History during my lifetime on this pottery. But this started me out, and okay, we think this was a uniform of the 50s. You can't note the woman. A lot of people have said the woman is based on Jenny Lind. And Jenny Lind visited St. Johnsbury, I guess as part of her tour. Probably the Fairbanks has just had her come or something. I mean, they raised money by her having her come to St. Johnsbury. So maybe it's his wife, maybe it's Jenny Lind, maybe it's Queen Victoria, I don't know. Maybe that's him or some other man, but it's just, they said, well, I said, did you have somebody run facial recognition software on it? I mean, really, because I mean, a lot of men of that period wore their hair in that fashion. Well, it may be General Blood. It's a heck of a beautiful piece of stoneware. And again, if you notice, a lot of these Fenton and Hancock pieces, this type of floral leaf flourish is on them, often at the bottom. You've seen that going by on the Fenton and Hancocks. Well, fortunately, a lot of the research I did on this was done in Bennington. Bennington had, Callie Vespucci and I called these Pandora's boxes. They had two unprocessed, this is the dome-lid box, and they also had a crate. And they were loaded with everything possible that was saved by, except for a few pieces that are owned in St. Johnsbury, that was saved by, well, the family of Leander Fenton. And there's one of those little redware jugs we saw there earlier. And everything is in here, including pieces of clothing. My God, that's Leander Fenton's coffin plate. This was saved, and everything in the trunk and the box. And that's what, also those photographs of the pottery and those daguerreotypes, which are in the pottery ledger, were all in there. And these had never been seen or used or processed. And their accession records they don't really have anything from the older years, but we did find a letter that John Spargo had sent to one of the descendants of the Fenton family, saying, you mentioned you had family memorabilia, and you know, the Fentons were very important in Bennington. And at that time, there was no history museum in St. Johnsbury anyway. We'd like to have one, so we're pretty sure that these people in the family, as we can tell from the correspondence, that gave them to the Bennington Museum in the 40s at the behest of John Spargo. But interesting things in here, I mean, the white things are porcelain, and there are those letters, among those porcelain letters, and one of these, this is a remnant of one of those door plates that you sometimes see in Rockingham or flint enamel, but they're also done in porcelain. I think they had to be things that Christopher Weber made in Bennington, and occasionally sent them up or passed them up to his, to his first cousin in St. Johnsbury is all I could think of. They couldn't have been making, those had to be made at the U.S. Pottery. But that's the kind, and this interaction between the branches of the family is interesting too. Well, here's more of the stuff. Again, it's got the initials of Leander W. They had to have made at the U.S. Pottery. The buttons, the letters. That's a fire brick. Well, it's not actually a fire brick. It's a bisque, like copy of a fire brick. And there's a piece of Rockingham glazed. So that might have been made up there, I don't know. But again, these are all preserved by the family. I mean, the other thing about the boxes, there were hundreds and hundreds of items in these, and you had to know all the genealogy of the family to even describe them. Callie got a young woman named Sophia, who was a sophomore at Mount Anthony High School, and they hired her under their grant program as an intern, and her assignment was to arrange and describe what was in these boxes, which include both artifacts and records, paper items. And she didn't have any archival training or anything, but damn it, she did this beautiful, thick inventory of what was in the boxes. And fascinating things, believe me. One of them was this broadside advertisement for the St. Johnsbury pottery, 1850 blank, in other words, fill in the year. But it was L.W. Fenton, and we think it was when he began the stoneware pottery before Hancock came, like 1850 to 52, because among the things they sell at the end are water fountains per gallon. I forget how much a gallon, and it says the same, I think it said, oh yeah, urn shape ornamented. They were, I don't know, $1 something a gallon they sold those by. So I think those are the ones we saw the images of earlier. You know, those ovoid decorated water fountains. So this would date it at the early period. And then, oh yeah, the ledger, the Fenton pottery ledger. I mean, what information isn't in it? This is just, I don't know what this means. In I think this was 52. It's or Mr. Frederick, Mr. Hancock, and then there's, we don't know what that word means. First we thought it was agriculturalist, but it does make something about a 1 3-gallon churn. But there's all this, so he must have been paid extra to make this churn or something. And there's like repairing the stone dam is in there. Oh, there's one case where one of the potters, Leander writes careless, and he fined him 50 cents for breaking the coggle wheel and things like this. All these lovely little, and one time where Leander had paid someone to drive him with a wagon to Troy, New York and back in the 1850s. Well, Troy had potteries, and I assume that was the reason, something like that. But all these fascinating things. Most fascinating of all is the first page of the ledger. These are his recipes, receipts for glazes. Rockingham glaze here and there, and bluing. And bluing, it's got salt and starch and the clay and the cobalt. So, I mean, we talk about cobalt glaze, but it isn't cobalt as it came out of the earth. So what they're doing is they're turning the cobalt into a slip with salt, starch, and clay, and I forget something else in there. And then this is the one large spoon plate of, well, it says manganese, which is the brown, but pushes the brown drip on Rockingham and stuff. But here they're using it in a blue mixture to apply cobalt to stoneware. I mean, where do you ever see anything like this? Almost never. And they're in that ledger that sat in the there's a little more about what was in some of the things in the ledger. The ledger that sat in one of Pandora's boxes from like the 1940s to a couple years ago. You know, I mean, we would wish this information survived on other potteries. The other interesting things, he supplied merchants, and you wouldn't think St. Johnsbury and Manchester, Hampshire that far, but they started supplying them after the Kraft family's pottery closed in 1852. And one of the Crafts, Edward Kraft, came to St. Johnsbury to work after the business closed down there in Nashua. Then they started supplying Manchester and Hampshire with pottery. And the Jersey clay from somebody who was a cattle drover, I suppose they say, well, can you put some clay in your wagons along the cattle must have been driven up the old road from Troy to Bennington and up to St. Johnsbury or something like that. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I don't know about St. Johnsbury, but in Dorset,
Yeah.
we do know that the Fentons here went over to Troy a lot because it was a port city.
Mm.
And they would get their clay from Perth Amboy, New Jersey, shipped up the Hudson, dropped
Yeah.
off at Troy. Maybe that's also where
That's what-
Nander was getting his
Yeah,
notes,
and
cobalt and manganese.
along with cattle coming up from Troy to St. Johnsbury.
That's a
Anyway.
long way.
But it's fascinating though. Now this, yeah. You can't take pictures here with the leaves. This is the site. This is the remains of the stone dam. This is part of the I know it's an awful photo, I've gotta get back there. Part of the foundation of the ice, an ice house was built on the pottery site in the 1940s. And it didn't have a foundation yet, but we know the pottery site was described as having a mound on it, which was all kinds of sherds and kiln furniture and everything like that. So what they apparently done is just sort of bulldoze that flat, put an ice house on it for a few years, abandoned the ice house. Otherwise, the site would be undisturbed from 1860, if not for the ice house. And what we found is these are kiln bricks fused together with this salt glaze on them, 4 of them. And this is some of the things we're finding there. There was this sort of separator is actually, which broke, turned out to actually be redware clay. There's a brick. This is some of the I hope to get up there again this year if I can get up before the ground freezes and do some more. But it sounds like, and because it was just one little area. But again, when stuff like that is dumped in a heap and then bulldozed, as you say, John, who knows where anything's going to be? You lose your context of having professional archaeology or anything done to it. And I think that is it. If anyone has any questions. Yeah.
A comment, people wonder, why did they end up in Dorset? Jonathan's aunt, I can't remember her first name, married Consider Hanks, who was
Okay.
a gunsmith and lived across the street from where Jonathan.
So they had relatives in
Had
Dorset,
relatives,
yeah.
had relatives here.
Because, he had to pick it out for some reason in 1801. And you already had potteries in Bennington. You didn't want close to that.
Yeah.
So I guess they would be far enough north. And actually at that time, redware potteries, I think there was something in Middlebury, and there really wasn't another, other than, well, other than Bennington and Captain John Norton, there really wasn't any competition anywhere near it. So that made sense. And they found a place where there were relatives, yeah.
Consider Hanks and his wife, Weber,
Yeah.
lived on the Meadowy, and there is clay in the
You
Meadowy.
mean in Dorset Hollow?
In Dorset
Yeah,
Hollow.
okay,
And when it is
Yeah.
fired, it is redware.
yeah.
It is red.
And it might have been something where they communicated to Jonathan that this redware clay was available,
Yeah.
something
And,
like that.
yep, and,
Yeah, yeah,
And then he started bringing
Yeah.
it up from
yeah.
Troy.
Because I'm trying to think, did he no, he didn't go back to Walpole. He came here directly from Bloomfield, Connecticut. Because I think everything had been closed down in Walpole by 1801. That the Colonel Weber was dead, and someone else got the land and all this. Yeah, that makes sense.
As these potteries moved a lot, I mean, they were all over the place
Yeah.
geographically. Was that caused by the clay running out? Did they run out of clay, or was it just market
Well,
conditions?
that only applied to redware potteries, because the stoneware clay all came south of glaciation, and mostly from New Jersey. I don't know what the reasons are. The clay banks may have run out in some places, but there may have been other individual reasons for each pottery. Now, again, in here, in your case, they're giving up the redware pottery here and moving East Dorset, you said in 1810?
Well, stoneware was, I believe, was also
Yeah.
made here in,
Well,
Dorset
what
Island.
do you think the reason for that move was?
Well, the theory that I've heard was that there were some rare kaolin beds over in East Dorset,
Yeah,
so it would be easier to get some clay. Whether or not they were as good as the Perth Amboy clay, I don't know.
well, they wouldn't have had stone, they had kaolin and ochre in Vermont. They
Okay.
couldn't have had stoneware clay, because it only exists south of the glacier lines. And, but maybe it was ochre and kaolin. Because that was,
Yeah.
the
There's definitely ochre over in North Dorset, so.
yeah, and also the place where Christopher Weber Fenton got a lot of his ochre and kaolin, the site sort of survives. It's near kind of near Furnace Brook Road over on the northeast side of Bennington. There is still a bank there where the red ochre and the kaolin can come out of a bank or down in a. Did you ever see them, John?
No.
Down in the someday when you have two good lakes, I'll show you the site down there if
That'd be
you're
great.
interested. It's there. So they were in, and I know a lot of kaolin was found in Moncton. So it must be in I think there was a band of it in the western, just below the western escarpment of the Green Mountains, where they were finding this stuff. So that too makes sense. No references to it in any of the geological publications of it being in Dorset, or are there? The state geologist
No, the ones
reports?
that do, are after the Fentons left Dorset,
Yeah,
and the only mentions are of iron ore that was being used in the
Yeah.
local furnaces.
because I forget the year now, but somewhere in the 30s, 40s, Christopher Weber Fenton wrote a letter and report that was published in the annual report of the state geologist about finding the kaolin, on the northeast side of East Bennington or the village there and stuff. But it's you can see a whole hill of it was taken away, but it's still there and accessible, even. So I bet you that was and that's what attracted him partly to Bennington, wasn't it, from Dorset? And to
Well, I think they
some
went down to
extent-
Dorset because they married into the Norton
We
family.
married in the Nortons,
Yeah.
but that's where these big deposits of both kaolin and ochre were available. Any other questions?
Well, if there are, feel free to ask in the other room. We've
Yeah.
got some great cookies and liquid refreshment for you there.
If you want to see what kind of stoneware a billionaire can donate to a museum, give a look through this book on the Weitzman collection.
$80,000?
Yeah, but recently he donated one from Geddes near Syracuse, New York. It was like a big jar, and it had a detailed and incised illustration of buildings along Wall Street, all washed with blue. He paid $240,000 for that in an auction. Because I know it's real because I got to touch it when I was down there on other business a couple of months ago. She said, "No, you better not pick it up. You couldn't replace it, but you can touch it."
Right. With one very tender
$240,000.
finger, yes. So we do have our Fenton display here, including that shard from St. Johnsbury and one early piece from Boston. But two quick things before I let you all go. When Warren was talking about St. Johnsbury and the Athenaeum, he mentioned the Yosemite Valley by Bierstadt,
Yeah.
Albert Bierstadt, and how they built the building around the painting pretty much.
Yeah.
And just so you know, whenever St. Johnsbury comes up in anything I'm presenting, I have to talk about that painting as
Oh,
well.
it's
It's an amazing thing. But I know what you're all wondering. What does that all have to do with Dorset history? Well, you're in the right place to find out. Manchester history, actually. When Bierstadt went out west in the 1860s, His traveling companion was a person who was writing serialized novels and travelogues for Harper's Weekly, who, as a troubled youth, kept getting kicked out of boarding schools and ended up for a little while, yeah, you got it, at Burton Seminary. So that's a connection there. I know, it's not much of a connection, but it's my job to find these things. Next month, November 16th, Thomas Fontaine of Grafton will be here to talk about his children's book about the messenger boy of Grafton. And he'll be talking about the book and the process of doing the research and writing a kid's book on history. So, thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Can I pull the flash drive out without you doing anything to the?